Okay, Jem, thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, still to come, former firefighters blaming the government over the bushfire crisis, teachers cracking down on the rising send nudes culture in schools, in for the long haul, the 20-hour non-stop flight to London, and OK Boomer, why this catchphrase is tearing families apart. Certainly annoying, I know that. It's all coming up on the latest from 7 News. The top-end police officer charged with murder over the shooting of a 19-year-old Indigenous man in the remote community of Yuendumu has signalled he plans to vigorously contest the charges. Let's bring in journalist Caroline Overington and commentator Dee Madigan to talk about this and many other topics. Welcome again to both of you. Thanks for being here. Now, the police union is standing by the 28-year-old officer, calling him a decorated member who's been awarded 3 bravery awards during his service. Caroline, let me ask you first. This is it sparked a lot of protest over the weekend and a lot of reaction. Why do you think this incident in particular has sparked national demonstrations?
Well, the difficulty is because you have an Aboriginal man as the victim and a white police officer, and this has been a flashpoint, particularly overseas, where you've seen the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Now, in Australia, we've mostly dealt with the deaths of Indigenous people in custody. That's been the big issue for us, and it's been a while since we've seen something like this. And I think that there was some feeling in the community that this might be our Black Lives Matter moment.
Dee, you were actually in the Northern Territory at the time of this.
I was.
Give me a sense of what you were hearing, seeing, and I guess the sentiment, because that goes to the whole nature around the controversy and the demonstration around this incident.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is there have been so many black lives lost in custody, and I don't think any police have been charged with it so far, and that's a pretty extraordinary situation. But look, it's so hard to know exactly what happened. We're talking an incredibly remote community. Tensions are high. It is tricky. I tell you, the bit that I found the weirdest was reading the newspaper coverages, particularly yesterday and today, and they were talking about this policeman, and they kept saying he comes from a prominent Canberra family. He went to a good Canberra school, and I found that quite disconcerting. I'm not sure how it was relevant.
Caroline, does that worry you? And we should be careful here because there are charges and it's going to be before court, but does that narrative around that worry you?
The main thing is to protect the integrity of the trial.
I think to your point too, to the credit of many of the protesters, and there were protests in all the capital cities last night, a large one in Sydney. They were in the middle of the protest when the charge was announced. They cheered, they shouted, but then there were some good spokespeople who then said, right now, we need justice, let's leave it to the court.
Exactly. And we do, I mean, there was, I believe, a body camera and stuff.
There was, yeah, which is really interesting because, you know, in a situation like that, I think people tend to think, oh, well, if the police officers shot somebody, maybe he had a reason to shoot them, and we don't know in this situation. But there's body cameras, which makes you think, well, they've got footage, and that's going to be really helpful.
All right, we'll see where that goes. A group of former fire chiefs are accusing the federal government of ignoring their warnings from as early as April, claiming Australia could have been better prepared for the bushfire crisis if they'd listened to the climate scientists. So, Dee, it's a tough one. Is a failure on the government's part? What do you think?
Yes.
100% yes?
Yes. These fire chiefs, they're not coming from a political background. In fact, they come from a real variety of different sort of political backgrounds, and they all got together and said, we've got a huge issue here. Even if you put climate change aside, which you shouldn't do, the amount of time we've got to backburn and to burn off is getting shorter and shorter, and that's an incredibly dangerous thing to do anyway. I found out today that 5 to 10% of burns get out of control. So there's a whole lot of danger with that. They could see this build-up happening. They've gone to say, hey, there's a huge problem. And it's like, oh no, thoughts and prayers will do it.
Oh, now that's that's not quite what happened. I mean, whose policy is to blame is the question that's being asked. I mean, are we doing enough backburning? Are we getting down far enough into the undergrowth to make it worthwhile to do the backburning? That's also a conversation we should be having.
But maybe the Prime Minister should have had the conversation with these experts who went to him and said, this is a conversation we need to have.
I absolutely agree we need to have the conversation, but I'm really concerned that you've got people out there we've got another death today. I mean, this costs the lives of Australians every single year, and we're having an argument about whose policy was right and whose policy was wrong.
Are we going to big picture on the conversation at the moment, Dee? Should it be about the on-the-ground policies of backburning and hazard control burning first, rather than the big climate change?
Yeah, look, I think both. I think the problem is climate change is such a politically loaded thing that no one wants to go there. So maybe if we just stop talking about that and start talking about what we can do to mitigate bushfires, we might get more people on side.
Yes, and you can certainly understand it. I was on the mid-north coast in the week, and you could feel it on the wind. The way the trees are so dry and the way they crackle when they tremble. It's ready to go up. And I'm not a fire expert, but I could sense it. So I can imagine that fire experts are out there. They must be terrified because it's also the fire experts who have to fight it. And I think that's why they get so frustrated. I mean, it's their lives on the line.
All right, teachers will be trained to handle the send nudes culture. This is a thing, including how to gather evidence in response to the rise of explicit photos being sent by young people. Dee, does the responsibility lie with the teachers here? We seem to put a lot back on them.
Yeah, look, I mean, ideally, students should hand in their phone when they get to school and then get it back at the end, and that's the end of it. But the reality is it's part of life, and I would be teaching kids they're going to send nude photos. They just are. I'd be teaching them which apps are encrypted and secure and which ones aren't. But if I was a teacher, I'd be incredibly worried, and I was a teacher. What you don't want is anything to do with teenage nudity. You can't look at it, because then you're actually breaching the law as well. So it's such a fraud area, but you have to deal with it as teachers because it happens in classrooms.
Carolyn, necessary step for our schools? So this used to be called sexting, now it's sending nudes because of all the various apps and bits and pieces.
I mean, you're absolutely right. What's happened is the technology catches the schools on the hop. So if suddenly everyone's got a phone, and that's fine because it's just a daggy old mobile phone, but then it's suddenly a screen with pictures on it, and kids are sending nudes of each other. So you've got kids in your class who have essentially soft pornography on their phone. What do you do?
But to Dee's point,
you can't look at it.
How do you do that? I mean, once you're as a teacher in the care of children, you're seeing
in all schools. I mean, we just kind of allowed it to happen. Like these guys at Facebook and Apple are all going to do the right thing. They're definitely not.
They're not.
So let's grab control back as parents and as teachers.
So no phones in schools. No mobile phones
in schools. You check them in the locker when you go to school, and you take them if you need them for the bus home for safety
how
or whatever.
How does that work for your laptop, which essentially is connected to your phone through your iMessage?
Well, I mean, what do they do with laptops? Surely they don't sit there looking at each other's nudes. They're meant to be at school.
I think you might be surprised.
There's a lot of devices.
Yeah. I think just explain to teenagers what can happen, where their nudes can end up.
That's the big conversation.
You just need to
do you
have.
think they really understand that?
I think they can do, and I think that the best way to do it is actually to get other teenagers who have bad experiences is probably the best mouthpiece for that, and because they are going to do it.
I personally don't believe they think long term that those nudes can stay out there forever.
No, I don't think they do either. I think that, but the other thing to remember is it doesn't matter if it goes to 5 people. When you're a teenager, that's your whole world, your classroom. They're not thinking about it's just like all my friends have seen it is enough to destroy a child.
Yeah. Right, Qantas is testing a non-stop London to Sydney flight as we speak for the first time in 30 years in the hope of, they say, boosting tourism. Carolyn, how do we feel about a 20-hour long-haul flight?
I so badly want to be in it.
Do you?
I do. Yeah. I just love what Qantas is doing here. They did a non-stop New York, Sydney flight, and now London. I mean, think about what a miracle that is. Compare that to what our grandparents would have done, 6 weeks on a boat. In one generation, it's just an incredible initiative, and no one else has to do it because it's us who live here in Australia so far from the rest of the world. So if we don't do it, no one will, and they are.
Do you a great challenge, or would that bore the hell out of you?
Well, I used to have a really bad fear of flying, and I found that flying with my children cured it because I just wanted the plane to crash. But the reality is, going to London, most people I know don't stop over for a couple of nights anyway. You'd hop off at Bangkok for 3 shitty hours in an airport and then get back on the plane. So the idea that you can just cut that out, I think, is a great idea.
And Alan Joyce did say on the New York-Sydney flight, there was one chap who sat in his seat for 19 hours and didn't get up because, they were monitoring all the passengers. Right. It was a test flight, taking their heart conditions, how often they slept, that kind of thing. This guy just sat there.
I used to do that. I used to take so much Xanax and alcohol to fly.
What would you do about the pee?
How I didn't die.
That was called a coma.
Work just to say, why do we have to fly your business? You could be in cargo. So I used to not move for 12 hours. How I didn't get deep vein thrombosis is beyond me.
I'll give you my take on it as someone who used to fly a lot for work, and I haven't done recently, but the thought of a 20-hour flight or any long-haul flight, that's just peaceful because no one can get to you. You can't get messages. news
You can
can't get.
now.
Yeah, but I don't. I mean, you
Yeah.
can get Wi-Fi and things like that, but the bliss is you can choose not to use
Yeah.
that. It's
Yeah.
just that rare time you have.
Yeah.
It's great thinking time.
I
used to love that
weak.
stuff.
We're
I love it
also
now.
weak. As soon as you see the little
Yes.
Wi-Fi thing, you think,
You
oh,
click
just
on
have a quick check.
Yeah,
But no,
okay.
it's my
I
own.
have-
It's
I
my
have
own
done
time
that.
now. Yeah.
A lot of people have gone from I'm not going to turn on the Wi-Fi to why does this plane not have Wi-Fi?
It's the new catchphrase dividing generations. OK Boomer, have you heard of this? It's even making its way into the New Zealand Parliament. The term is used by millennials to immediately dismiss their elders. Dee, I've had first-hand experience of this. I've got two obnoxious boys who've been saying "OK Boomer" to me for about 3 weeks, and I've ignored them because it's generally what I do, and I didn't know what they were going on about. Is it promoting a rise in ageism, do you think?
Oh yeah, I got OK Boomer today.
You've been boomered?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of you go, no, I'm not actually technically Boomer, but then I realised, you know what it is? There's always been this thing between young people and old people. I think it was Socrates who said the youth of today have got no respect for elders. You know, it's always been this thing. And for boomers, they're not talking about a specific age. They're actually talking about privileged people who've done nothing with it, I think, and that sort of. But I sort of said, well, this boomer's the one who's paying. He wanted the Wi-Fi password, and when I said clean your room and you can have it, he said, OK, boomer. And so then I said, well, the boomer's paying for your Wi-Fi. So
Caroline,
You should make that the password.
Yeah,
Okay, Boomer.
There you go. In a complete vain attempt, I tried to educate my boys about the boomer generation and what it applied to. They
You're
just
not
went,
even a
they said,
boomer.
That's what I said.
Yeah, they
I said,
don't.
you're talking about your grandparents, not me. And then,
Right.
that was completely lost on them. But what do you think of this? Is it harmless? Is it just one of those things that comes along between generations?
Dee is 100% correct. It has always been this way. Do you remember Bob Dylan? The times they are a-changing, get out of the way if you can't lend a hand. It's always been the way. They will always think that we're old, daggy, have no class, we were never any good at anything ever, and they are better at it all. And that's the way you
Like the way
should
we
be.
thought about our parents and the way they thought about their
Precisely. That's
parents?
the way it should
and it is kind of funny.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
OK, non-boomers. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you
Caroline
again.
Dee, good on you. Thank you. Well, still to come, the tale of the unicorn puppy melting hearts. There he is around the world. The pipeline proposal that was almost a disaster, plus your Friday weather forecast. It's all next on the latest from 7 News.